Mid to close range Hitscan DPS are some of the most impactful DPS that you can play right now. And between the three that we're going to talk about in this video, MCCREE, Reaper, and Soldier, you'll always find a situation where you can guaranteed have tons of impact and hard carry your team. That being said, let's break down each of the three DPS, give you tips and tricks on how to start popping off with that hero, and then we're going to line up how your DPS goes against many of the other DPS in the game and give you tips and tricks on how to overcome any sort of unfavorable matchup. Speaking of which, we have brand new high quality Overwatch League breakdowns on the GameLeap website. Go check it out right now. All that being said, we got no time to waste. Let's just jump right into it, shall we? Now, kicking it off with the first DPS we have on our list, MCCREE. Now, MCCREE is a cornerstone hitscan DPS right now, and he's built on a baseline of positioning fundamentals, understanding your matchups, and raw mechanical aim. Let's go over 4 solid things that you can start implementing in your MCCREE game to level it up and start gaining some of that easy SR. So the first thing that you need to understand about MCCREE is that positioning is one of the most important things that you need to get right on MCCREE that many people get wrong. You need to be in close proximity to both natural cover and heal-based peeling unless you're actively trying to make a play. The reason for this is MCCREE has very limited mobility compared to many on the characters on the roster, especially when you're comparing it directly to the 2 other hitskins we're going to talk about on this list. MCCREE only has a role that can get him out of a sticky situation, and it won't even get him out of that many. And frankly, if you use your role to up your DPS, you're not going to have it and you might potentially need it. MCCREE has no get out of jail free card, and that's why your positioning is so important. Just like I said before, close to natural cover, close to healing unless you're making a play. Now you might be asking, what do you mean by making a play? Sure, there'll be times and places where you can take an alternate angle play, or you can peek at a natural cover on a flank and potentially get some value in. These plays could definitely be made, but almost all of them should still have a sort of natural cover to potentially retreat behind, and they're not going to be the primary way that you play MCCREE. You can't fill every single game with non-stop flank plays, or you're simply going to get read by the enemy and shut down. You need to have a great baseline, and that all starts with the fundamental positioning that I talked about here. Now let's talk about the second thing on the list, and this is don't get greedy with high noon. You'll be surprised how greedy people, particularly at the lower ranks and even all the way up to masters, get with high noon plays. The problem is flank high noons in general get shut down far more than they work out. That being said, I think the reason that people like to go for them so much is it feels so good to get that 4 or 5k, they completely forget about the 10 times they've tried it that same week, and every single one of them has failed. You want to go with the consistent play, not the flashy one. That's not going to win you games. And on top of that, as your enemies get better and better, this kind of stuff's going to work less and less. If you want to actually get value out of your high noons, you need to do this instead. There are several different ways that you can get powerful high noons off, but I think the general 3 ways that you should use your high noon is 1, the easiest way, just to use it to reload. It can be simply used to reload. Honestly, high noon isn't something that you're going to get a lot of value out of in general, so I wouldn't fault you for just using it this way. It's guaranteed value every single time. The next thing that you could use high noon for is to simply stop enemies that are flying in the air, specifically Pharah Mercy. A Pharah that uses her jets and a Mercy that follows her is really easy to just blast right out of the sky with high noon. It's incredibly simple. And the third way I could say you could use high noon with is just comboing it with your team. You could combo with an ultimate, something like a shatter, or simply get your Rhine to hold up a shield for you as the enemy team is pushing onto point. If they have to touch the point, let's say you're about to cap the point, you know the enemy's going to push in. High nooning behind a shield means that enemies have to push onto the point or they'll die, but they can't kill you because you're behind a shield. You set up a no-win situation for them. Now let's talk about the next tip that we have for you on our list, mastering FLASHBANG. FLASHBANG has a 7 meter range with a 3 meter radius. That means that it can potentially go up all the way to 10 meters, and that is the range that you need to memorize. Commit it to your memory and feel it out on MCCREE. Also, understand that it's a 6.25 meter roll, so you can get a total of 16.25 meter stretch if you roll, let the roll animation end, and flash an enemy. That's a pretty far distance, and think of it like the kill zone on MCCREE. There's a lot of characters that we're going to talk about that you have a bad matchup with, such as Soldier if you're too far away from them. But if you can play around natural cover and finesse yourself into that 16.25 meter range, you roll into them, you flash them at max distance and follow it up with a headshot, you can win a matchup. And all you gotta do is get the enemy in the effective range of your 8 trigrams. Anyways, on top of that, you need to master how FLASHBANG can be used to win matchups, going above and below Genji's Reflect, understanding the hitbox of other enemies, and understanding other situations like being able to flash directly above a Rhine shield. A double headshot after a flash above the Rhine shield will almost always kill him in a close team fight, and that's something that you can implement right away, and it's really simple, and many Rhines won't even play around it. And lastly, for this tip, I'm going to leave you with the fact that remember that the less you rely on FLASHBANG to secure the easy kills, the kills where you're flanking up on enemies, where you're in that close range and not necessarily threatening threatened immediately, the more you're gonna have your flashbang to punish enemies who try to push you. Think about it this way. If you don't have to use your flashbang to potentially kill the MCCREE on the sideline, then when the doomfist pushes you, trying to punish you, you'll have your flashbang to kill him as well. Mastering flashbang is not only being able to follow up on every single flashbang that you use and knowing how to get it off, it's also knowing when not to use it and just to use your regular fire as well. Now, the fourth and final tip that we have for you on MCCREE is you need to practice matchups and mechanical aim under pressure. It's easy to hit bots, and shooting bots is going to help you warm up, but it's not going to help you improve. You need to replicate that pressure that you feel in a real game, and for that, I'm always going to suggest TRYHARD free-for-all. I know I suggested a million times, but I'm going to keep suggesting it because people frankly need to keep playing it. You can also get something like a MCCREE only ult account or a Hitscan ult account to help you practice these things as well, where you primarily play MCCREE, but understand that the better you become at 1v1ing enemies, the more confident you'll be able to be, and not only just fulfilling your role, but also making these plays as well, because often if you go on a flank or an off angle as MCCREE, some DPS will try to threaten you, and if you have the confidence to win these 1v1 matchups, you could win them, go back to your team, and take fights as a 5v6, or you could just go on a tear where you get matchup after matchup, get pick after pick, and just simply hard carry. Now, before we move on to the next character, let's go over some characters that MCCREE is really good against. Doomfist, Reaper, Mei, Pharah. While many of these characters have outplays that they can potentially do onto MCCREE, more often than not, MCCREE can contest these heroes very easily. I mean, Doomfist can hit stuns. As long as you get the stun off as he's flying at your team, you can easily punish him. Now, if the Doomfist waits for you particularly, or if you use flashbang not directly on him and he tracks that, he can still punish you, so watch out for that. Reapers who aren't paying attention to you are easy stun targets. Meis are easy stun targets. They really want to push up onto your tanks, so you definitely want to stun them out. And then of course Pharah is someone that you can easily contest. As long as you hit some amount of shots, you should be able to zone away a Pharah at the very least. Now let's talk about skill-based matchups. Some of you are going to think that these matchups are actually favored. For example, the Tracer MCCREE matchup, when it's in reality not. It's a skill-based matchup. If you've never had to deal with a Tracer that can actually threaten you on MCCREE, then you haven't gone up against a good enough Tracer yet. Tracers have a lot of resources to potentially bait your flashbang, and after you don't have flashbang, it's very difficult to win a 1v1 with a Tracer. If they can bait out your flashbang without having to use recall, then you're almost always going to lose the matchup. On top of that, matchups like Genji and Soldier, while you do have a lot of play against them, they also have a lot of play against you. Some of it involves effective range or just your understanding of the matchup altogether. Now let's talk about two characters that you're really poor against, and it's Widow and Hanzo, and it all comes down to effective range. These characters can play completely outside of your effective range in an area where you cannot threaten them at all, and just with you playing with the team or going on any flanks, they can potentially punish you, kill you, and there's very little outplay that you could do. The best thing that I would suggest if you're playing against these heroes is either one, hug natural cover and don't engage these heroes at all unless you're in your effective range, or go and try to make a play on them on the flank. These are matchups that it's worth it if you could potentially get them off the board. Now, moving on, let's talk about the next hero on our list, Reaper. Now, Reaper is a true wild card, and he doesn't play like most Hitscans, but still relies on core flicking and tracking fundamentals. The first thing that you need to start doing on Reaper in your games is you need to identify who the threat is and try to make a play on them. Seek and destroy. Reapers can of course farm tanks at lower ranks until DPS like MCCREE start punishing him. At that point, making plays that shut the Punisher down is very important if you want to start carrying. Reaper can basically set up no counterplay 1v1 scenarios with enemies by hiding in little hidey holes on the flank or on the high ground and essentially get that first shot in free of an unsuspecting enemy. First of all, Reaper can one-shot unsuspecting enemies, but if he gets that first shot in, even if he doesn't one-shot it, the second shot's so easy, and between his Wraith and his teleport, he almost always can get out of there safely. Here's what you want to do. Play something like the high ground. Play a hidey hole. If you get that first shot, creep up onto the MCCREE, get that first shot without him noticing, it's going to be so hard for him to win the matchup. If you can get a nice pump into almost any DPS, you can easily win that matchup. That's why the sneak and pounce playstyle is so powerful on Reaper. Now let's talk about the second tip that we have for you on Reaper if you want to get more impact overall. You need to be utilizing his Shadow Step to its true power. It's really fast and very underrated, especially when using it to push enemies. It can be used to contest high ground, teleporting right on enemies who can't burst them down. I can't tell you how many times I've teleported right on an Ana. I use my Wraith to dodge her sleep dart, and then I just easily kill her, no sweat. On top of this, Reaper can very easily chase down staggers. If the enemy team has lost and they're all trying to regroup, you can teleport right in on them, and they can't kill you in time for you to start shooting them and potentially stagger the whole team. On top of this, there'll be tons of scenarios where the enemy pushes onto the objective of the point and their healers are in the background. You can use that scenario to shadow step straight to the enemy supports and pressure them instead, get those kills, and then come back to point and finish the rest of them off. Last but certainly not least, if you're actively thinking about it, Reaper is very strong on potential boop maps such as Ilios, where you can easily teleport back on to the map as long as you get booped off and you're thinking about using your shadow step. It's really easy to save yourself, which makes him more powerful on those maps, and you can play more risky on the edges. Now for the last tip that we have for you on Reaper, let's talk about how to get successful ults off, and I think there's 3 true ways that you can really get some successful ults off, almost always aside from the niche scenarios. The first way is by surprise. If you can do enough damage to enemies that even if they have abilities or focus fire to shut you down, it's not going to be fast enough to stop you from killing multiple enemy members, then it's a worthwhile ultimate. If you drop right into the back of their team, and even if they stun you or react to you, you already killed their Ana and their Zen, then it doesn't really matter if they shut you down because you already got the value out of it. That's by surprise. Now the second example is where you kill the punish or peel first. Remember the first example I talked about seek and destroy. If you kill the enemy MCCREE and they don't have any more stuns, then you can ult with freedom because the focus fire is probably not going to be enough, especially if you get a lot of people in your ultimate to generate that lifesteal. Also, there could be other examples of like killing the peel. For example, a great time to ult is when you put enough pressure into demech a diva. The second you demech her, then you can ultimate and you have no diva defense matrix to shut you down. Now, the third thing that you can do, and this is the most difficult one, but it's the one to guaranteed get successful ults off, is just to track cooldowns. You track things like Ana Dart and MCCREE flashbang, and you wait for these to go on cooldown. Once they are, you can potentially make a play where the enemy is really relying on those abilities to shut down your ultimate, but all you have to do is wait and listen in those hidey holes we talked about and pop out an ult, and they're not going to have any counterplay because they already wasted their abilities on someone else. Now, the important things to understand about Reaper is good against just about every tank on the board, and he's generally not quite as good against DPS unless you can get the surprise factor on them. In my opinion, the DPS that he is really good against is Doomfist and Bastion, because neither of these characters can really threaten him that easily. He can flank the Bastion, and Doomfist doesn't want to go 1v1 against a Reaper at all. Now, for skill-based matchups, there's things like Mei, Genji, Soldier, Tracer, Widow. I think that generally, these characters are going to more or less play in their effective range, and Reaper is going to kind of play out of their hair. A lot of times, it's going to be a battle of who gets more impact, not necessarily you going and hunting down one of these characters, with the exception of Soldier, which you could definitely teleport right into his face and try to burn him down. Now let's talk about the bad matchups, and I think there's only 2 really bad matchups for Reaper, and it's Hanzo and MCCREE for 2 big reasons. So generally, I think Reaper is pretty good against non-stuns, but Hanzo can one-shot a Reaper fairly easily because of his large hitbox, and Hanzo can check for those hidey holes that we talked about before. And honestly, Hanzo will sonic exactly where your creepy self is, and they'll potentially be able to shut you down without you being ready for it. On top of it, MCCREE, we talked about it before, while yes, you could outplay him, it's still a threat on the table that you have to deal with, and if you can't deal with the MCCREE, he could easily shut you down every fight. It's not someone that you can simply ignore like a lot of people in the skill-based matchup. Now let's talk about the last character on the list, and for that we have Soldier 76. Soldier 76 is a tracking-based hero, high ground dueler. He can put a lot of pressures in for alternate angles, and he's fairly good at the 1v1 matchup. The first tip that we have for you on Soldier is that you always need to be trying to play the high ground. His primary fire is pretty terrible at working the front line because of low overall shield break compared to the rest of the cast. If you're playing Soldier, you want to be playing high grounds and alternate angles, putting pressure into the enemy tank's backside, not shooting shields but hitting their actual flesh, and putting pressure into the enemy healers and DPS as well. With a 6-second helix, you can fish every 6 seconds for a potential kill. You have mobility to get you out of any situation or flank behind the enemy, and you have a heal that lets you play away from peel from your team and your own healers. Now let's talk about the second tip we have for you on Soldier, and it's about visor use. Don't get overly greedy with your visor in the same way that you were greedy with the high noon. Use visor to secure easy 1v1s, flying targets, or when things are moving fast, ulting like a blade without nano. Don't try to use it against the whole enemy team or any sort of shields, as one simple shield or a DM from the enemy diva could just shut down almost all your value. Even if you only use it to secure a single 1v1, that means you're still alive and you're still there to put in constant pressure into the enemy team. Now let's talk about the third tip that we have for you on Soldier, and it's learn when to stand your ground and learn when to run away. You don't always have to run away from a fight, but you really need to learn when that is. Heal Station's a powerful tool that can help you win fights against things like Genjis, divas, tracers that want to push you. As long as you use your heal station well, even if they get right right onto you, a lot of times you can dodge them long enough to get your health back and win the long fight when they don't have enough abilities to potentially burst you down. That being said, if you're up against characters that have hard bursts, something like a MCCREE, no amount of healing will keep you alive if you're stunned and headshotted. So you really need to be playing your effective range against heroes like this, which I'll get to in a second. Last but certainly not least, if you're being dove by multiple targets or you realize that you're not going to be able to stand your ground, you need to realize this quickly and try to run away as quickly as possible. Soldier has the capability to just run away from targets, and even things like Genjis and Tracers, if they used multiple abilities to get to the soldier in the first place, a soldier that's simply sprinting at top speed, running straight away from them, maybe kiting to Omega, is going to be someone that's really hard to chase down and kill. Now last but certainly not least, let's talk about movement on Soldier. And abusing movement is something that every single Soldier player needs to start doing because it's so powerful on Soldier. While most heroes don't want to actively left, right, and crouch spam like crazy because it makes their shots very hard to hit, Soldier makes the enemy shots very difficult to hit while hardly affecting his at all due to the fact that it's a long range tracking weapon. If you can learn how to crouch spam left, right, and still hit a good amount of your shots, aim for center mass and still hit a lot of your shots, Widows in particular will have a terrible time shooting a Soldier with great movement, and you'll be able to win a lot more matchups that you never thought possible. Now let's talk about characters that Soldier's pretty bad against, and in general, Soldier's kind of bad against a lot of different tanks. While sure he could put some pressure into their backside, tanks with shields can completely shut him out, hence the need to play on high ground. He doesn't shield break exceptionally well, but he's okay as long as you can get the high ground and get behind them. That being said, Soldier is insanely good against most DPS, and he can 1v1 a lot of them. His good matchups range from Pharah, Tracer, Genji, Junkrat. There's a lot of different characters that he's insanely good at. That being said, a lot of the even skill-based matchups, things like MCCREE, Widow, Reaper, Ashe, while some of these characters can outrange him, he can get behind them, flank behind them, and set up a play on them, and with good movement, he can win a lot of these matchups, and good and smart use of effective range. Now let's talk about the two bad matchups for Soldier, and I think that the two big bad matchups are one, Hanzo, because Hanzo can easily headshot him. As long as the Hanzo's any decent, he can set up these scenarios where he headshots him. He has his wall climb, which means that he can go contest him on the high ground, one of Soldier's strongest positionings. Hanzo can actively contest it, so I do think that Hanzo is a character that you have to look out for. That doesn't mean you can't win the matchup, but you're gonna have to be pretty smart when there's an enemy Hanzo up against you. And then lastly, the ultimate bad DPS matchup for you is Doomfist. Doomfist is a character that can really farm you almost any time. If the Doomfist comes at you at full health and you didn't do any damage to him, he's gonna kill you. You need to be actively paying attention to where this Doomfist is at all times because he's gonna be hunting you. If you're on the high ground, he's gonna be waiting for you. If you're on the flank, he's gonna punish you instantly. You have to keep track of where he is at all times or else you can't be playing Soldier at all because a good Doomfist will farm you every single fight. All that being said, if you want to master Soldier, MCCREE, or Reaper, definitely go check out GameLeap.com. We have in-depth Grandmaster VOD reviews breaking down everything you need step by step so that you can start popping off on these heroes right away. Do yourself a favor and go check it out. You won't regret it. Anyways, if you have any questions, comments, or any other videos that you want to see, I would love to hear suggestions down below. That's all I have for you today. I'm Coach Mills, and until next time,